And we're back. Welcome to another edition of the Astro Weather. Today is Friday the 13th. And of course, Friday the 13th always evokes these, hear that? That's the thunder of the washing machine down under. Perhaps a sign, synchronistic, right in time. Friday the 13th always evokes an archetypal sense of fear and dread and foreboding in some people. Culturally, it's held as an unlucky day. I'm not one of those people, by the way. I'm not going to get into not just the symbolism of Friday the 13th, but the actual historical day that it's associated with, which happens to deal with the slaughter of the Knights Templars and their leader, Jacques de Molay. So from that day forward, it was deemed to be unlucky. But today we are looking at Mars direct, and Mars went retrograde on October 31st, and it is now direct in Gemini. And all those pent-up energies, all of the delays, have we seen more delays than, say, the last 2 weeks, starting with what happened with Southwest, and of course what happened with the FAA and Amtrak, and apparently some other Canada had its own issues with flights. So right as Mars is about to station, we're thrown right into the thick of Mars retrograde. Well, now it's moving forward, and if you've been feeling a bit frustrated and held back and held in check, well, the gates are open now. The thoroughbreds are being released from their stalls at the starting line. With that, I would say use a bit of caution when Mars goes direct in Gemini. Mars in Gemini in general is an incredibly restless energy. It always needs to keep moving forward. It's the aspect that I liken to being a shark, right? Sharks don't really stop. They keep moving. They have to keep moving because they need to have the water coming into them to circulate through their bodies. If they do stop, it's only for a brief period of time. That's Mars and Gemini. Mars and Gemini has to keep moving forward. So since many of us have been put in a position where we haven't been able to move forward, or our best efforts have been met at times with frustration and delay, one can only imagine the intensity and perhaps even the urgency to move forward and get something done. So at the beginning of a direct motion with a planet like Mars, there can be a really incredible release of energy. Now, it is Friday, not just Friday the 13th. And if you understand how news cycles work, and Gemini is related to news, right? You get the news every day. You get a newspaper, at least back in the day, you got a newspaper every day. And while Sagittarius was in charge of the publishing, Gemini was in charge of the print. It rules journalists. So when Mars going direct on a Friday, it's one of those days where they could drop a bombshell and just kind of move on with the weekend, move on with the NFL playoffs, move on with the things that really matter, right? So this is one of those days that's kind of interesting. We have Friday the 13th. We have a news day where they can bury things. And then we have Mars moving forward in Gemini. That's just the headline. We've got more to cover here. And we have a really interesting Grand Trine. So we go from a grand Earth trine with the moon and Sun, Pluto, and Uranus to, guess what? A Grand Air Trine. How does that happen? Well, it happens when the moon moves into Libra. And we have the moon at 6 degrees Libra. First decan, I take that back, it's 5 degrees Libra. First decan, hey, everybody gets a trophy today, right? That to me is the moon in Libra. Hey, you get a trophy. It's a win-win day. We have the moon in trine with Venus, which is also in trine with, guess what? The aforementioned Mars. moving forward and going direct. It's a very direct kind of day. And the one thing that I like about oh, look who's here. You were not direct today. You took the long way here. You took the longer path, but you know what? You're here, and that's all that counts. This is a day where you can be direct and you can be diplomatic. In fact, this is the energy moving into the weekend. So in the past few astro weathers over the like say the last week, there have been times where the moon being in certain positions, I've hedged on the side of caution at times, or I've hedged on the side of timing and waiting for the time to be able to kind of move into a position where you're responding versus reacting. This is not really one of those times. This is a time where everything is aligned: emotion, relationship, and action. Now, the one thing that we also have here, and I talked about this yesterday, is the Mercury in conjunct with Mars. But today, instead of just having bombshells dropped, or you're the person that's dropping the payload, there's a process here, right? Because the moon in Libra sorts things through. It's a mental moon. It sits there and says, okay, well, how is this other person going to feel? Now, this is not coming from the feeling body. This is coming from the mental body, because Libra's an air sign. So you actually have the ability to really put your sense of not just yourself, but how the other person might react or respond to the thing that you're about to share. And if you can do that, you can really couch some of this wonderful Grand Trine energy. Lively, spirited debate can also be an outcome for this, but in a sense of more of a shared experience and more of an idea that there is going to be an opportunity to come to some commonly held or more agreed upon position. Whereas, prior to this cycle, we had the moon in Gemini, we had these inconjuncts going on, and the moon was kind of hanging out with Mars. Those are heated debates, right? Those are very heated debates, and people are emotionally and mentally triggered to get their point across. You could have a good spirited discussion and debate, and at the same time, nobody really has to, I wouldn't say nobody has to lose, but there's a greater chance that both people or multiple people can walk away from a meeting or a discussion feeling like they were able to get their point across without being diminished or without being censored. Now, we do have a Mercury moon square coming up. That'll happen a little bit closer to tonight and moving into the weekend on Saturday. That one is a little tricky. That's a little tricky because, again, with Mercury being so far behind the sun at this point, it is really occulted. So one of the things that, in general, a Mercury moon square will be indicative of is somebody who has a difficult time being able to integrate their instincts and their emotions with their mental body and how they think and process and articulate. There's a conflict here. Sometimes they'll disregard their instincts in favor of a more rational approach, which may not always be good. At other times, they may get into their instincts at the expense of thinking things through, right? So again, whenever we see a Mercury moon square like this, there's an opportunity to work through some of these issues. Mercury retrograde. This could also bring up times where you said to yourself, you know what? I really should have done that. I really should have bought Apple when it was at $25 a share, right? That's how the retrograde works. And the moon is a planet that's connected to looking backwards. The moon does tend to be a bit sentimental, right? So there can be a little bit of wistfulness with this Mercury retrograde squaring the moon. You know, we just had Lisa Marie Presley pass away. And it's not just her, but it's her connection with Elvis. And this is really, and Elvis was a Capricorn. So there's going to be a lot of Elvis in the air over the next 72 hours. And again, this is the remembrance or even the lamenting of something that was in the past. So the weekend is looking pretty good. I mean, I think there's a lot of really good energy, but as we move further into the weekend, we have to sort out, where we are instinctually and emotionally. How do we communicate things? And in the past, because that's what Mercury retrograde is about here. In the past, where did we err? How did we not listen to what we were feeling? Or how did we not honor our ability to work through something in a rational manner and sacrifice that for how other people feel? It's a really interesting dynamic this weekend. But at the end of the day, I think it's very, very positive, really positive. Now, as a result of the degree, we do have a trine with Pluto and the moon, because the moon is at a pretty early degree here. It'll move out of that trine, and by the end of the weekend, we're going to have a moon-Pluto square. And that's pretty intense, right? That's where things really begin to get vulcanized. And no matter how fair that Libra moon can be or attempts to be in that square with Pluto, there's a real intensity that threatens the balance and the stability of people being able to have a rational, logical, and kind of measured approach with how they're dealing with their emotions. Family issues could come up this weekend, particularly later in the weekend when we get into this moon-Pluto square. So the weekend starts off pretty pleasant, pretty harmonious, and time moves pretty quickly. Between Friday and Saturday, time moves pretty quickly. Then as we get closer into Sunday, this is when the intensity of feeling comes up. And maybe it has to do with people going back to work on Monday. But get into the day. Don't be afraid of Friday the 13th. It's really just a lot of superstition in a lot of ways. And maybe I'll do maybe I'll look at it on Sunday night. But I've got a whole other Sunday night planned here on this channel. What else can we say about the astro weather for today? I think really that's the headline, right? This Grand Trine with the moon and being able to kind of accelerate and move things forward. And Mars finally going direct. Just again, especially on the highways, right? When Mars goes direct after it's been stationed in retrograde, the impatience of people will make itself known. Okay. Just keep your eyes on the highway, hands on the road, eyes on the wheel, to quote Jim Morrison. All right. Let me get into today's star of the day, which I think is today was, when I was going through people who were born today, it was not very inspiring. I just have to say. The pickings were slim. And if you're born on, January 12th, because a lot of times people like to identify with people that are born on their birthday. You're born January 12th. Do your sign a favor. Do your day a favor. Be special. Lift that day up. Raise the profile. So rummaging through the births of January 12th, I landed upon none other than former presidential candidate Andrew Yang. Now, why would I pick Andrew Yang? Well, first of all, as I mentioned before, it was like going to the Publix during COVID. There wasn't a lot on the shelf, okay? But I thought to myself, is there something in Andrew Yang's chart that screams universal basic income? Because this is the guy that brought it to the table. And the answer to that is, without a doubt, unequivocally, yes. The only thing that's Capricornian about Andrew Yang is his ascendant, which made him a serious young lad. Vesta, which is just a smidgen there. He's an old soul. He's got kind of an old soul vibe, right? With Vesta conjunct the sun. And that's it. That's it. Everything else about Andrew Yang is Aquarian. Moon in Aquarius, Mercury in Aquarius, Venus in Aquarius. And look at that, 478. And then we have Pallas also in Aquarius. So when Andrew Yang started to bring this idea of universal basic income into the discussion for the presidential debates, a lot of people lauded his ability to forecast into the future and look at, the effect that automation is going to have on the workforce. Well, with Pallas, by the way, which is connected to pattern recognition, Andrew Yang would have some insight into the world. He's a tech guy, right? That's where he made his bones. But astrologically, he would have some insight into where things are going. And I remember him being on Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan thinking that, yeah, this makes perfect sense. This when you add it all up and spell it all out, and how much money this is going to save, and how this is going to be a net positive versus a net negative for society, I'm all for it. Like, that's how Joe Rogan embraced Andrew Yang's concept of universal basic income. You can just see it here. The moon, new moon in Aquarius. And, sometimes new moon people, I wouldn't call them naive, but they can at times be overly enthusiastic when it comes to their emotional expression. Now, the moon is full, new, and when there's a new moon, what you want is you want to fill that cup, right? It's not like the full moon and the cup is completely full to the brim. So new moon people want to pack their lives with experience. So with Andrew Yang, what he's doing here with this new moon in Aquarius is he's sampling all these different things, whether they're business, technology, perhaps even some form of spiritual practice. Like, he wants to fill his emotional cup with things that are going to theoretically lead into all these other expressions of Aquarius. Andrew Yang, he's a bright guy. He's got Mercury in Aquarius. He has a Venus conjunction. This is a really interesting part of his chart, but they're all so bound together that at times the sign that is anti-ideologue, which is Aquarius, can be a true ideologue when all these planets have very little space between them, right? And remember, Aquarius is a fixed sign. So for Yang, being able to revisit his position, not that easy. It's not, because once he's locked in, he's locked in. Now, here we have Uranus. He made his money with technology, right? And Uranus on the midheaven is technological. And when he was born, Uranus was exalted in the sign of Scorpio. All that tech stuff was happening. Apple, Microsoft, the roots of the internet. I mean, it's all happening when Uranus is in Scorpio. And Yang is somebody who he profits from it, right? Becomes a big part of his life. But again, even with Uranus here, right? With Uranus on the midheaven, Uranus rules Aquarius. So we have this discussion again with universal basic income. Now, I'm not really a fan of UBI. That said, I think Andrew Yang was ahead of his time with the concept. Now, was he just being given some, World Economic Forum talking point? Maybe. But it's clear anytime you get squares to Uranus, especially with Mercury and to some extent with Venus, timing can be off, right? You're either ahead of your time or you're behind the time. So in Yang's case, I think he's ahead of his time. Will there be a day when universal basic income becomes a part of our social experience? I wouldn't bet against it. I'm not an advocate. I'm not a fan, but I wouldn't bet against it. Also, when you look at the second house, which represents what? Material resources. It's Taurus's house. What do we have here? We have Jupiter in Pisces. Isn't that beautiful? Jupiter in magnanimous Pisces. And here's Ceres right next to Jupiter. Again, right? What are we looking at here? Everybody gets something. there's such great bounty, it can flow forth onto the populace. And he's the shepherd. He's the shepherd of bounty with a Ceres Jupiter conjunction. Now, we got some squares going on here, particularly with Neptune. So when you get into a Neptune Jupiter square, sometimes you can be a little unrealistic. You can be, riding very high on theoretical spiritual currents, but you may not really be able to see the forest for the trees. What's interesting about Yang's chart is the lack of earth. The only thing he's got with earth is Sun, Vesta, and the ascendant. Everything else, big time outer planets or outer signs. Neptune, 11th house. What's the 11th house? It's groups. It's the Aquarian age. He's got his true node there. He's got Neptune there. Yet another indicator for ideas like universal basic income. So the question is, will Andrew Yang run for president again at some point in time? More than likely, Capricorns are in it for the long haul. And he's got this Pluto right up here at the zenith part of his chart. So he doesn't give up. This is not a guy that gives up. And I would not be surprised if he shows up in some kind of a third-party affiliation, throwing his hat at the ring again in 2024. And with Pluto moving into Aquarius, it's going to be very interesting to see how it impacts Andrew Yang. It's kind of like the time's catching up with the person. And again, I am not an advocate here. I'm not here to tell you that you should support Andrew Yang and his political aspirations. But based on the astrology, Andrew Yang has some interesting times ahead of him. Now, whether he actually runs for president and becomes president, or he becomes an advisor to a president, I wouldn't count this guy out. Number one, he's a Capricorn. Number two, he's got Pluto in the 9th house. And Pluto in the 9th house has a complete transformation of belief systems. And a lot of times when people have Pluto in the 9th house, remember, this is the highest part of the chart. So he's looking down on the rest of the world and saying, I can fix that. I can fix that. And he may be a bit diluted. He may be a tad diluted, but at the same time, he also has some penetrating and deep insights into where things are going and how they can be fixed. Again, not a fan, but don't count this guy out. And he's definitely somebody who is clearly ahead of his time. And in his chart, the astrological fingerprints are all over universal basic income. And it may not stop there for Yang. He may be one of the advocates of automation in artificial intelligence. So Andrew Yang, Capricorns, they generally hang around. They generally get where they're going. It's just a matter of time and timing. All right, that's it. Please join me back here today at 12 noon on this channel, where I'll be interviewing the great, quite frankly, and I'm really looking forward to that. I think he's a terrific and talented broadcaster, and he's an extremely hard worker, really hard worker. And he's an Aries, and hey, Mars is direct, so it's a great time to bring him onto the show. All right, you know how the end of this goes. Use your head in order to discern what's real, your heart to step in what's possible. Get ready for a stimulating weekend, possibly a bombshell that's dropped today on the Friday before the weekend, with Mars going direct in the sign of what? Journalism, and the intensity, the emotional intensity, and the pitch of the emotional intensity comes Sunday. Use your head in order to discern what's real, your heart to say what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix. Thanks for being here for the Astro Weather. Bye for now.